Welcome to Chavin de Huantar, which is a Highland pilgrimage site. It is also the place of the first major belief system to spread out and unify the Andes in what we now call an interaction sphere. It is located in the highlands, and what that means is it's perfectly located to attract pilgrims from the Amazon as well as from the jungle, as well as from the coast. Visitors also came from the highlands to this region as well, but it was a place that could unify the three basic zones, ecological zones that were a part of the tradition of Peru. This was a temple that was built for pilgrims, and the goal of your visit here would be to visit the Lanzon, which is shown in the lower left, and we'll get a closer look at that shortly. You would also, on your way to visit the Lanzon, ingest narcotics, so the experience of taking hallucinogens or a mind-altering substance was part of the plan of your pilgrimage visit. The site itself is in many ways associated with the strong spiritual symbolism of the Amazon, and that is going to include images and use of medicinal plants and herbs as well as psychedelic plants and herbs. You will also be seeing jaguars that are associated with the Amazon and that become, in a sense, basic shamanic animals that are a part of Chavin as well. Chavin de Huantar became such a popular pilgrimage site that it actually had to be expanded. And let us take a look at the next slide to see it a little bit better. This is a view of a model of what this originally looked like. The old temple is located in this region, and right here is where the Lanzon was located, kind of in the center. Later, however, because of the number of pilgrims coming, the new temple was added, and as a part of the development of the architecture, an area in between them was created, which is a U-shaped court with a sunken circular courtyard. And we're going to be taking a look at that because that adds new symbolism to the development at Chavin de Huantar, which still remains focused on the Lanzon. When you arrive here, one of the early experiences that you're going to see will be the exterior of the building. And that is going to include the tenoned heads. You have some of these in your book, figure 30 to 32. Originally, there were 200 of these that decorated the walls, and they are up high, significantly over my head, if I were to stand underneath that tenon head right now. These tenon heads represent transformation, the transformation of a shaman, also the transformation of any pilgrim who would come here and visit. They're also pretty impressive. They seem to float from the wall. They seem to be suspended mystically and convey a kind of quality of the divine because of that. A tenon head is a head that is supported by a projection that goes into the wall. And I have one here, which is my slide, in the lower right. And what I'd like you to see is this beyond the head itself. That's a kind of pin that sits into the wall and helps to support the head. All of these once upon a time had those, although many of them are now fallen and broken. The one that I have that still has its tenon attached is a feline head, which is a basic part of Chavin iconography, and I am assuming it references a jaguar. And that incorporates fangs, which seem to be going in different directions, kind of overlapping fangs, kind of blunt snout, and a curving band for an eye with an iris that is usually referred to as a pendant iris. That means it seems to be suspended from the top portion of the eye. All of this following the characteristics of Chavin. These tenon heads illustrated the development that you went through once you consumed an hallucinogen. So some of the heads show individuals that are fairly normal or usual looking, and then other heads begin to show the process of transformation as the drug takes hold, and you begin quite literally to transform into a jaguar. The tenon head in the lower right, in fact, does have a series of serpents, 1, 2, 3, and I'm wondering if in this case these are not vision serpents. By vision serpents, I mean serpents that reference the quest of narcotic travel from our realm to another one where we might indeed encounter a higher reality. These are close-ups of some of those heads that maybe will give you a little bit of an idea of how this works. The one that's on the left is a fairly developed depiction showing that the transformation has actually taken place. We have the crossed fangs, we have the blunt, excuse me, the blunt nose of the jaguar, and we have our pendant irises in our rather round eyes. So we have more or less arrived at our status of being within an altered state of consciousness and achieving the level of being one with the jaguar. On the right, however, this is a beginning stage. Even though we have a hint, these are the fangs right here, at least some of them, we have a hint of that. We also have mucus that comes from both of the nostrils, and we believe that this is associated with the consumption of snuff, but in particular a narcotic snuff that would have helped to alter the consciousness of the participant. If you take a look at the eyes as well, you're going to see that they're bulging and reacting to the induced drug state of the individual. Once you were prepared by having consumed a mind-altering substance, your goal would be to go to the inner passageways. This is a portion of the journey to see the lands on, and I'm assuming also that what you would have liked to have done is actually speak to the lands on, because we do believe that it functioned as an oracle. This site, which had been abandoned earlier after an earthquake, is nevertheless going to be used again later in time, and at the time of conquest there will be an oracle functioning here. So we assume that there also was during the period of the height of Chavin. These passageways are enclosed. It's an enclosed form of architecture. The interior space is kind of tight. It's confined spaces with long corridors and staircases that change the level of the floor, and they direct you. You have very little control over where you're going in this maze-like environment that is multi-leveled. There are also ducts along the way that open into passageways, surprisingly placed, that will allow light to enter. This environment is also filled with sound, and there are a couple sounds that we feel comfortable with. There might have been more. One of them is the sound that results from a hydraulic system that allowed water to rush through Chavin, giving us the sound of rushing water, which to my imagination might have sounded a little bit like a conch shell if you held it up to your ear. The reason I'm saying conch shell is because we also found a number of conch shells in the lowest region of the passageways, left partly as offerings, and some of them had clearly been used for making music. The interior passageways of Chavin de Huantar have incredible acoustic properties that would have reverberated the sounds that would have been made by conch shell musical instruments. And we know for certain that this happened. We do have images that actually show the presentation of conch shells, and then we have the conch shells themselves, which were prepared for music making. What we're looking at on the top, a relief carving, and then the drawing that makes it a little bit easier to read. It's one of the typical religious images from Chavin de Huantar, and it shows a figure, a fanged figure with typical Chavin eyes. This figure has hair that has been substituted with intertwined snakes. Those snakes we'll be talking about later. Each of the braids is created with 2 snakes, so I would like you to be thinking specifically of duality, which is so important in the Andes. But then go down to the shells. We have a figure who is holding 2 different types of shells. In the hand over here, it is a strombus shell, and it looks like this one, and that's the prime music-making shell. The other shell is a spondylus shell. These 2 shells, both shells, yes, but different in nature, were considered indeed to be opposites. So we have a pretty clear example of Andean duality. I would like to attempt to play you a little bit of what the strombus would sound like. I've included a couple links for you if you'd like to hear a little bit better recording. I think that that is probably enough to give you at least a sense of it. It's important to be aware of the musical sounds and the reverberations because we have these amazing corridors where we're traveling to see the Lanzon, to have this encounter with probably the premier deity of the Chavin cult. And as we do this, we're hearing perhaps rushing water and the sound of the reverberations of the strombus. We're already intoxicated with narcotics, and this becomes a truly mind-altering experience. In the slide on the left, I'd like you to see the way in which the passageway kind of suddenly turns to the left. These are more of the corridors that lead through Chavin in, again, this kind of maze-like passage system, the goal of which is to encounter the Lanzon.